If 2020 has taught me anything, it's that the world could randomly end at pretty much any point. Between pandemics, nuclear war, a rogue asteroid, the world could end in any number of ways. So I got to thinking, if you had even a few months to prepare, where would be the best place to survive the end of the world? Right off the bat, we're going to lay down a simple ground rule. We're only going to be talking about things an average person could do. I'm sure Bill Gates probably has some secret underground base the size of Disney World, and Elon Musk could just jump on a SpaceX rocket and hitch a ride to the moon. But for everyday people without access to unlimited capital, where would be the best place to survive an impending apocalypse? And since I love increasing my watch time, I'm gonna give you 15 seconds to think and try to figure out where in the world you would camp out. The two places that most people tend to think of just wouldn't work: abandoned bunkers and islands. Immediately, you might be thinking of moving into some abandoned bunker. After all, there are thousands scattered across the world from World War II, but most are run down without any real way to make food, clean water, or recycle air underground. Not to mention, loads of other people will have this idea, so you'd have to constantly be fending off hordes of attackers to defend your useless base. The other obvious solution are islands. Camp out on one, and you could have hundreds of miles between you and the rest of civilization. But islands are actually one of the worst places to go. A few years ago, the United States Geological Survey used satellites to scan the world's coastlines with a 30-meter resolution. They found more than 300,000 islands, but before you get your hopes up, they basically all suck. 318,868 had a land area less than 1 square kilometer, and that's just way too small. For someone who doesn't know a lot about farming, you'd need about 5 acres of land to grow enough food for yourself for a year. And that's assuming you have quality land, plenty of rainfall, and a long growing season. Not to mention, you'll be eating nothing but veggies for the rest of your life. I know, surviving the apocalypse doesn't sound that great now, does it? And with civilization gone, you won't be building your house out of metal and concrete, so you'll need enough land to grow trees faster than you cut them down. And you'll want animals too. Even if you don't want to eat them, they'll help you with farm work, provide you with clothing, and can give you milk and eggs. Adding in everything else you'll need, like extra land so you can rotate out fields to not deplete the soil, you'd easily need 100 acres of land. That's about half a square kilometer. But half a square kilometer is still smaller than 1 kilometer, so you should still have hundreds of thousands of islands to choose from, right? Well, that's half a kilometer of usable land. But virtually all smaller islands are mountainous and made of hard rock, or are flat and mostly covered in sand. For example, with how mountainous the islands are, only about 5% of the British Virgin Islands are actual arable land. And flatter islands like the Maldives, ignoring the fact they'll be underwater in our lifetime, have only 13% arable land, with the rest of the islands covered in sand. On top of all this, you'd need some company. Back in the 1980s, NASA research showed that the vast majority of untrained individuals go stir-crazy in isolation after only 2 years, so you'd have to bring a few friends too, increasing the amount of farmland you'd need. Factoring in the arable land you'd need and how big an island would be to support that much land, this means there are only a few thousand islands in the world big enough to support humans, and they basically are all either A, places like Madagascar and Hawaii that are already filled with thousands of people you'd have to fight off, or B, would be flooded with people constantly flocking to them. The few best islands would quickly get snatched up by the ultra-wealthy and defended with private armies. So now that we're done talking about the obvious choices that don't work, what about the non-obvious choices that would work? If you want to survive long-term, you're gonna need some basics to survive. The most important thing you'll need to live on your own is food and water. Most crops need around 50 to 80 centimeters or 20 to 30 inches of rain during the growing season. This eliminates about half the world's landmass because there just isn't enough fresh water in most of Africa, the Middle East, or Australia. And unless you're an experienced farmer, you'll want to be able to grow crops year-round, so places like Russia are off the table. On top of places with not enough rain, you want to avoid places with too much. That's because the tropics have 6 times higher rates of diseases and are filled with much more dangerous animals. And keep in mind, after the end of the world, it's not like you can swing by a hospital and grab antibiotics to treat an infection or a jaguar attack. And most surprisingly, the soil in these rainy tropics actually sucks. That's because these soils are not just infertile, they're the most nutrient-poor soils in the world. I know, you might be wondering how rainforests filled with hundreds of billions of trees and millions of plant species have terrible soil, but it actually makes sense. Around the world, we see poor soil leads to high biodiversity. A soccer field-sized patch of forest in frigid Alaska has about 40 different species of plants, compared with about 70 in temperate England and 300 in the Amazonian rainforest. The superdiversity of tropical rainforests is only equaled in one other type of ecosystem on Earth: the fire-prone shrublands that grow in Western Australia and Southern Africa. Because the soil is so poor, one fast-growing species can't spread and dominate, giving time for more species to arise. On top of that, the soil has a lot of clay that can't trap nutrients well. Even if you added fertilizer to the soil, assuming you could find some, the nutrients would mostly wash away under the heavy rain. All this means is that the tropics are actually a horrible place to survive after the end of civilization. This takes out places with more than 250 centimeters or 100 inches of rain a year, mostly focused around the equator in places like the Amazon, Congo, Southeast Asia, and the Malay Archipelago. The tropics account for 36% of the Earth's land masses, which eliminates more than 70% of our remaining land to choose from. Keeping in mind our temperature requirements to grow food year-round, this leaves us with the most promising regions: the southern US, northern Mexico, northern Argentina, South Africa, most of Europe, southern China, eastern Australia, and New Zealand. Besides food, you're going to want plenty of water. Although you can always collect rainwater, it's safer if you have nearby sources of clean water. South Africa has been in the spotlight in recent years for running low on water, and Australia has very little natural water, so these two are out of the running. The final thing you're going to want in an apocalypse scenario is some peace and quiet, so obviously you'll need to be secluded. It doesn't really matter what ended the world. If it was an infection, obviously you'll want to stay away from people. But even if it was the outbreak of nuclear war, you don't want to be near a lot of people who can do you harm. Because China is so heavily populated and urbanly developed, especially in the parts we're looking at, China's off the list. Whether it's nuclear war, an epidemic, or internal conflicts, the US and Europe are likely to be engulfed by these problems. So while they're good places to survive in normal times, in the end of the world, maybe not so much. This leaves us with Argentina. Northern Argentina checks all of our boxes and is one of the best places in the world to survive an impending apocalypse. The climate is subtropical, ranging from 15 degrees Celsius or 59 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter to 30 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. And with 50 to 80 inches of rain and 6 to 8 hours of sun a day throughout the year, even in the winter, crops can grow year-round. And they're growing on some of the most arable land in all of South America. Finally, northern Argentina has some of the lowest population densities in all of South America, so you'll have fewer people to be competing against. 2020 was pretty bad, so if you're looking to survive 2021, you might want to check out some flights to Argentina with American Airlines. They don't sponsor me or anything, but I figure not even the end of the world can get rid of those scumbags. If you liked the video, check out some of our best uploads here, and remember, there's always more to learn.